Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Free, a podcast for collective liberation.
Feeling the momentum of other people realizing that our liberation is interconnected, that our joy is interconnected, that this is not about being saviors or even allies. This is like what we are all working towards for our mutual liberation.
It's really false notion that the state can provide safety at the helm of other people's lives, as if safety could ever come from harming other people.
For us to be free, everyone must be free.
I'm playing different role and Hannah's playing different role. Deema is playing different role. That it's all contributing into the better world that we wish to see for our children and the future generations.
Hello and welcome. I am your co-host, Hannah.
Hi, and I'm Deema. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the politics of appeal. And for anybody who wonders what that is, it's essentially something that many marginalized groups have to deal with, especially those who are in oppressed situations, where the way that they talk has to be, or they feel has to be palatable. Fit a certain way in order to be accepted, mostly by Western audiences. And so we're going to dive into that, dive into the feelings that people have as they have to grapple with that, dive into why maybe it still has to exist, or maybe it, for some people, and why some of it's completely wrong that it has to exist as well. So, complex topic. Hannah, your thoughts?
So many thoughts on this, and also not just the how are maybe a marginalized or a systematically kind of intentionally marginalized, I want to say, group is presenting themselves, but how those of us who might consider ourselves partners are presenting as well.
Yes.
And so I think that the journey of getting out of white saviorism, we'll say, for me, or we can just call it saviorism. Obviously, there's a lot of white saviorism, but there's other types of saviorism as well. So the start of that for me was just understanding, working a lot in sub-Saharan Africa, and then understanding that this shallow perspective of that region of it being like always war torn and everyone's always poor and there's the kids that are crying and it's the aid commercials, and understanding that that was dehumanizing. And maybe as a teenager participating in certain things to fundraise, I remember specifically being like a 15-year-old and wanting to fundraise for, at the time it was called Swaziland, an organization that was taking care of kids that had been orphaned because of HIV. So I had participated in that. And then I came to this point as a 20-year-old and going to Congo and then going into countries after. And I created a rule for myself that I would never want to take a picture of somebody, because most of what I was doing was photography, in a way that I wouldn't want my own family members to be depicted. And so that is like, okay, I don't want to show this kid in the dirt to try to gain sympathy, but it's dehumanizing. This is not, dignity is so important. And so then my journey kind of continues, and protecting dignity is always the first priority. That's the first principle for me in any work that I do. That line becomes very thin sometimes. And I think that I didn't realize how thin that line is between protecting dignity and like asserting dignity, and then also trying to get people to care about an issue and also strategically humanize a population to other people who might not know anything about that population. So maybe before it's in the white saviors and there's, oh, this poor kid. And then out of that, it's, oh, look at this perfect, brave kid. Like, but that still comes into, this is not fundamentally humanizing. It's not really doing what we're trying to do. So the politics of appeal has been, I guess, something, and we're just putting words to it now, but something that I've been trying to digest for a long time and trying to identify the line of for a long time. And I know that we read in this episode, I just want to say, is not about Perfect Victims by Muhammad El-Kurd, but it was somewhat inspired by the conversation surrounding that book. And so that's kind of my initial thought on politics of appeal, and understanding that every time we say certain things, and I'm just going to give a couple examples of this so that people understand, because I don't want to talk only abstractly. But when we're advocating for Palestine and we're saying things like, oh, so many Palestinians just want peace. Or if we're trying to amplify the murder of a journalist like Shireen Abu Akleh, and we say, she was an American Palestinian woman, rather than just saying Palestinian, right? So we're using these tactics to try to get stories in the news, or to try to get people to care, or to try to get a population who is being oppressed to not seem threatening. And that can be very dangerous because it actually kind of plays into some of the narratives that we're hoping to dismantle. So there's the line of, this is strategic and we're trying to get change. And then there's, this is causing long-term kind of shallow representation and dehumanization of a people group we're trying to advocate for. So that was a lot of information, but maybe Deema, you can share a few of your thoughts
Well,
on
I mean,
this.
I'm glad that at the very beginning you did bring up that the politics of appeal doesn't only impact those who, and the people who participate in the politics of appeal is not only the people who are oppressed or marginalized. It's also allies. It's people who want to speak about these issues, and they just so have to carefully, maybe they don't have to, but in order to be strategic, many times they are having to really be super careful with their words, be not necessarily saying exactly what they think, but saying, crafting it in such a way as to not upset anyone. And I haven't finished Muhammad El-Kurd's book, but it has definitely brought to light some feelings that I have about this sort of catering to mostly Western audiences to receive the appeal and the caring from them, like having to sort of like do these like gymnastics and like just show that we're peaceful, good people, when it's not required of other groups, really. And it sort of is it deflects from the problem. It deflects from the root issue of the oppression, of the violence. And it's also just, it's very hard on the people who have to do it. I mean, let's be honest, constantly being like so careful about what we say because we don't want to appear angry. We don't want to appear like we have bad feelings of bad ill toward anyone, because maybe we're talking about a government, but someone says, well, now you're actually talking about the people. And there's just so much having to be like, and I think with Israel Palestine, it is particularly difficult just because of the long amount of dehumanization, the many, many years of dehumanization of Palestinians. But one thing he brings up, and I think it is interesting, and I struggle with this, is like doing the work of humanizing Palestinians. It's almost like, why should we have to do that?
Yeah.
Like it's almost insulting that we have to do that. And at the same time, I know that in reality, there are people that just don't see us as human. And so I don't like completely say that work shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about before the show, like I think that people need to play different roles in this, and there are people that might have to play that role of helping people see that we are humans. But you're right, it gets into this very dangerous place of potentially doing the opposite, because we're not we're not using our voices to speak against, we're using our time to just sort of show that we're human, which people should just know that.
And sometimes that very act is so undignifying, to be like, see us as human. And it's, to engage in that feels humiliating, I'd imagine. It's like, first and foremost, acknowledging that the fact that a people group who are being genocided need to have a PR strategy is completely messed up and an indictment that the international system is not only flawed, but completely broken, or worse, built to protect only certain people and to prosecute only certain perpetrators. So that, like, first and foremost, recognizing that, and then saying all efforts to humanize shouldn't have to be. And so I agree with what you said about different roles in this movement, and some of those roles are humanizing. And I think what I'm wrestling with is, what is that line? I think you can humanize without falling into the politics of appeal. And I also think this is where storytelling kind of comes into play, because I think that Palestinians existing loudly, just wherever they are, already kind of does this, right? And also telling Palestinian stories. Like, I think Mo on Netflix is a great example of this. Just telling Palestinian stories. And it doesn't even need to be something with a call to action, but it's just existing in the same spaces as everybody else starts to do this, starts to humanize. It starts to erode the false narratives that people might have about Palestinians or about Arabs or about foreigners or about whatever that could look like within people's kind of fear.
That feels to me like less of a thing that one would have to feel like they're, they're like getting themselves in a pretzel in order to like appear. That story is just it's a story. Mo's story. And that piece of work that he put out in the world, that felt to me less like politics of appeal and more like, I'm telling a story. I'm a person in the world. But yet it had the impact of humanizing and opening people's eyes to Palestinians without it feeling like begging for it. You know what I mean? I just feel like, and I feel like it was such a beautiful it was such a beautiful show that felt really genuine and true to him. Not like he was like, I hope you will. Because there were some edgy parts in that show too. You know, it didn't feel like he was trying to appeal to someone. He's just telling his story.
Yeah. And I want to talk briefly about like just the concept of the perfect victim too in this, because I know we're talking about politics of appeal, and perfect victim has something to do with that. And I want to talk about my own experiences in this, because I think that has helped me navigate what I say and what I don't say.
Yep.
So since October 7th, being active on social media, obviously we know it didn't start on October 7th. I avoided certain things because they felt icky in my body. Like, this is not intellectualized. I was just like, I don't want to do that. I avoided engaging in certain debates about what did or didn't happen on October 7th, because to me, obviously atrocity propaganda is important to dismiss, but some of the debates seem to be whether, like, the underlying question was, is this violence that's in response to October 7th justified? And so when those debates of whether this did happen or didn't happen are engaged with, it's almost like people are trying to say, no, it's not justified, so this didn't happen. Well, it doesn't actually. Regardless of what happened on October 7th, the Israeli response was not justified. Like, so that debate, that question, atrocity propaganda needs to be dismissed. But also when we're engaging in these debates, it's like we need people to be perfect, or we need the armed resistance to be perfect, or we need all these things. That's not a requirement of whether or not people deserve dignity, or people deserve, protection, and people deserve all of these things. And so my own experience of being a sexual assault survivor, and being a sexual assault survivor in a Christian community where there was a lot of question of whether or not I deserved the violence against me based on alcohol consumption, based on prior sexual relationships, based on all these things. And in the months that followed, I was so scared that I would like get drunk in a bar and a professor would see me, because this was brought to the high level of my university. And then they would think that I deserved it, because that's actually how a lot of people at that point were thinking. This is before all of the sexual assault stuff came up on Christian campuses. This was like a year before. I just missed this awareness bubble. So I remember that feeling of like, if I mess up, they will think that the violence against me was deserved. And so when it comes to Palestinians, it's like, oh, if a kid throws a rock, like if a kid throws a rock in the West Bank, that is considered a security threat, and he will be tried in a military court, which has a 95% to 99% conviction rate. So, oh, that's an act of violence. He deserved that. Oh no, look, this kid was arrested and he wasn't even throwing rocks.
Yeah.
Well, even if he was throwing rocks, that doesn't justify that either. So this need to say that, like,
he's throwing a rock against an occupation that is using massive military weapons to oppress him. So, like, the comparison, it's just like it's very clear those are not equal things.
No. And it's this, and then this child is subsequently held in administrative detention.
Yeah.
The families have no idea where this kid is, and we're sitting here debating whether he threw rocks or not. Like, it's when we engage in certain things like that, it doesn't underline the absurdity of this unequal power dynamic. And so there's certain things on social media where I was like, I don't know why, but I don't want to say that. If somebody was harmed or shot in the West Bank and they had a foreign nationality, I didn't want to emphasize
that they were. Yeah.
And yeah, it's like, I understand why some people do, but for me, it just didn't feel right. And so there's a question of, like, who are we talking to, and who is our audience also within this? Yeah. And I know that you and I talk about, like, the word peace, and how do we feel about the word, like, peace building and things like that, or an event that talks about that this is for peace. So sometimes we're talking to people we're organizing with. We're talking to people who are already on board. They already know that this is messed up, and we want to figure out the best way to address these problems, to get our governments to act and all that stuff. Sometimes we're talking to the people that we're not even trying to necessarily recruit into the active kind of, I call them the 3.5%. We're just trying to convince them to be, like, passive supporters. And those people, we have to use kind of, like, terms that appeal to them, like words that are going to connect and not seem so scary. I, like, have lightning happening right now. Words that connect and don't seem so scary. And we need to get them in the room, and then we can have the conversation about collective liberation and maybe start to make them a little bit uncomfortable. And there's that line there of, are we enabling the system that says that if Palestinians want liberation before peace, that makes them less worthy of safety? Are we enabling, even in the conversation of, like, joint work and events with Palestinians often have to have a Jewish person or an Israeli person? Mm-hmm. Doing those events allows for the sort of, like, the white moderate, the potential passive supporters, to enter that space and have this conversation that might get them to maybe vote a certain way, or call the representatives the next time we ask, or do very basic things, stop purchasing, SodaStream, whatever that means. And sometimes when we do those things for optics, we're making a sacrifice in the long run. And that's the line that I'm still continuously wrestling with.
Me too. I mean, I'm constantly wrestling with that. And I just, it's such a delicate line. And there's times where I feel like we shouldn't have to do all these things to get people to sort of move and open their eyes. But I'm also kind of a realist in that I don't think that the movement for collective liberation is going to be effective if we can't bring more people into it. And there are a lot of people right now who this is all new to them. In many ways, it's been really interesting to see that, like, it seems like now that people are being impacted by some of the things, root harms that have caused that are at the root of Israel, Palestine, Congo, Sudan, like now people are seeing it a little bit. They're seeing fascism on their soil or not their soil, but in the US. And they are now starting to sort of, like, make these connections, but because they haven't been thinking about it, if people don't invite them in, it's going to be very hard for them to become part of that movement because people
Yeah.
will just become apathetic, or some people who I think were apathetic or weren't really watching are watching now. But if they feel
Hmm.
like, well, I can't say anything right, this new language is language I don't understand and nobody translates it or helps them get there, our movement stays too small. And
Yeah.
collective liberation, so for me, collective liberation has really been the thing that has helped me feel stronger in actually pushing the bounds of this model minority politics of appeal. For a long
Hmm.
time for me, I just felt like I can't say anything. If I say anything, I am going to be called, you know, anti-Semitic. I'm going to be called a supporter of terror. Um, and so I also did not engage in those kinds of conversations because they felt like traps to me.
Hmm.
It felt like if I were to say anything about the dignity and livelihood that is only fair and the correct thing for us to try to fight for Palestinians, that I would be called all these bad things.
Yeah.
And it is this concept of collective liberation that all of us, we all have to be free for any of us to be free. This idea that and it's so grounding and it's so, to me, when and I do get people now that I'm much more vocal, saying things like that to me, I can be really grounded in the fact that I don't want harm to any innocent people on any side. And I think that's a lot of what is being written by other writers like Muhammad al-Kurd and others. But I think what he's doing is he's exposing the fact that we even have to feel that way,
Hmm.
that we even have to worry so much. And he's kind of saying like you shouldn't have to. And I feel like voices like that are really important. We need people saying that we shouldn't have to humanize ourselves. But I also think in the movement, we need also people who are bringing people along,
Yeah.
even if it feels like, why should I have to? Especially in especially in progressive spaces. I think that's where it bothers me so much,
Mhm.
is in these progressive spaces where people are all about human rights and they're fighting for so many things. And then when it comes to Palestine, they just don't have the same conviction and they don't
Yeah.
use the same moral and ethical compass to look at it clearly and call it out.
So I would also say in progressive spaces that racism against Palestinians isn't being called out in the same way that racism against other groups are called out. And obviously, outside of progressive spaces, racism has a lack of accountability in a lot of places, right? But within progressive spaces, people want to pride themselves on their ability to address this. So
Yeah.
if a Palestinian activist is accused of anti-Semitism or is accused of supporting a terror group, then people will often jump to their aid and say, no, they're peaceful. No, they're not anti-Semitic, rather than saying, like, a Palestinian, just by speaking up against a genocide and for the protection, the safety, and the liberation of their people who are under occupation and who have been under apartheid systems for 76 years, just by the merit of someone speaking up against that and against a state that is doing this, that is not representing the Jewish people, just on the merit of speaking up for their own people are accused of anti-Semitism, that is racism. And that should be, in progressive spaces, called out for what it is. But we're still in this game of appeal where it's like, no, 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 they're not that way. No, no, no. Like, Palestinians have to often say that they're, to prove that they're not anti-Semitic before they can even
Oh
speak
yeah,
about
we're
anything.
guilty before we're proven innocent. It's this whole thing of being super clear. And it was also like the whole thing of like you have to, like, before you say, and this has changed, but like in the beginning it was like you had to condemn Hamas before you said anything. Like it was like this
Yes.
weird thing where we all got the memo. Like
Mm-hmm.
you got to say that. And I'm not saying that the violence against innocent people, that I'm saying that people shouldn't call that out, but like there was like a very clear rule for you to
Yep.
speak and not be targeted as an anti-Semite or a pro-terror person. You have to say that to begin with. And
Yep.
you're right. I do agree that people, instead of calling out the racism, which it is racism. It is racist to say that because a Palestinian cares about Palestinians and is speaking up for them, that they, or even not a Palestinian, an Arab, a Muslim, an ally is saying that they care about Palestinians, that means they're an anti-Semite. That is racist.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't get called out. It rarely gets called out. Instead, and you're right, it's because of this politics of appeal, this wanting to ensure not to appear to be too supportive of Palestinians. That people use well, they're peaceful, they're peace loving, and it's like, well, okay, that's true, that's a truth, but there we should be calling out the issue that what you just said or what you just did is racist because you used horrible stereotypes to determine that someone is anti-Semitic based on their love of Palestinians. It's just,
Mhm.
but it's happening everywhere. I mean, you see it with people and the protests, people saying that, people going out and saying that Palestinians should be allowed to live and not be killed and not be put through a genocide, that is anti-Semitic. With no words, there's no
Mhm.
words in those statements about Judaism or Jewish people. It's literally saying one group of people should be allowed to live.
I had a friend in the beginning of me speaking up saying, okay, make sure that have a lot of Jewish guests on your live and make sure so that you can protect yourself against
Yeah.
anti-Semitism. And my response to that was like, I have Jewish friends whom I love. My aunt, who is one of the biggest influences in my entire life and in my activism, she introduced me to feminism growing up in a conservative household and like Jewish. And I'm not going to bring in Jewish people and to just insulate myself from potential criticism. I will surround myself with Jewish people for insights and because they're people that I
Yeah.
love. But like, I'm never going to treat people as a pawn. And this isn't what my friend was asking me to do. He was looking out for me, but I'm never going to treat people like a pawn just to protect myself against criticism. And that's like even with us having Julie on early on and having like we wanted to make sure, okay, we're not doing this because we needed to have a Palestinian person and a Jewish person speak. We're doing this because we love what Julie is doing. We want to hear about Yiddish folklore and culture and history. It's not at all because of
Yeah.
that.
We want
And
to learn
so I
more.
refused.
Yeah.
Yeah. I refused to play the game, but I also came from a position of privilege to not play the game because I am not seen as threatening by the vast majority of people. I get DMs all the time. Why are you so hateful? I posted the book from the river to the sea coloring book, the one that they arrested those two bookshop owners because of that. Apparently, Israeli forces did Google Translate, and then they realized what that said. And people are like, "That's a call for genocide." And um, this is the stuff that we like the care to our words that is required. And I before that I didn't really say from the river to the sea. It wasn't necessary for me to. I knew it was going to cause a lot of conversations. And then when that book came out, or that news story came out that these two bookshop owners were arrested because of a children's coloring book, I was like, this I'm going to post about this book.
Yeah.
But that's you just know that it's going to get attacked, and the content of your speech is going to be completely diluted by the argument over whether something is or is not anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitism is a real problem in the world that we live in. Like, we have the rise of the alt-right in the US, and this is being emboldened by a Trump presidency, and this is super concerning. And there is a need to combat this, and overemphasizing and doxing and pointing out Palestinian protesters or protesters for Palestine who just want the freedom and safety and liberation of a people group is, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Jewish people here, so I'm being careful with my words, is like, that feels like that is a distraction from real anti-Semitism that does put Jewish people in
I
danger.
agree. I think this weaponizing of anti-Semitism as a tool to silence Palestinians or silence those who are in support of um, Palestinian rights. I think it's hurting Jewish people. I think it's I think there is a rise in anti-Semitism and it's dangerous. And I think fascism is going to make it worse. The rise in fascism and the politics that we're seeing. And it makes me very sad to see this sort of almost convergence of ultra nationalist Jewish people and this fascist far right ideology, because at the end of the day, that fascist alt right group does not care about Jewish people. And they have shown that in very bad ways. And so that scares me a lot. And it's funny, as you're talking, and this is like part of the, like, I don't want to say like psychosis, but like the part of the like difficulty of being a Palestinian in this country is like everything you say, at least for me, I'm like constantly going back, like, did I say that right? And there was one moment where I said, something like, it's okay for me to care about this one people. And then I'm like, oh, but that doesn't mean I don't care about other people. I mean, that's literally what I have to go through in my mind is like, have I made sure that I clearly care about everyone? And that's where collective liberation helps. And I really want I want to like gain a really robust language around collective liberation so that I can use that throughout my speech so that it's just easy. Again,
Yep.
but is that politics of appeal? Perhaps. Perhaps I am trying to appeal, but the reality is I know that I care about all lives. I know that I care that, and I believe that no innocent lives should be taken in violence. Um, and I really I do have a strong belief that many of the people who are for, we're not for, but are like very, very supportive of a nationalist Israel, I believe they are trapped in fear.
Yeah.
They are trapped in hate and fear, and this is not good for them. The oppressed and the oppressor are, I believe, in most cases, both very much, well, definitely oppressed, but I also think the oppressor is, in many cases, and they are trapped in fear. And I think that's what causes these alignments that make no sense. Alignment with the far right that at the end of the day think of you as the other.
Yeah. One thing that has helped me in this, I've been in this process, and you know this from the past 3 weeks, where I'm really questioning, like, is how I'm showing up on social media authentic for me? And I have been, like, I wouldn't say certain things. And part of this was, I wanted to, and even how I dress and how I present myself and how I speak, and that I don't get too angry, because I know that the people that I want to talk to, the white moderates or the moderates or the people that don't aren't yet sold on this idea of collective liberation, so that they would listen to
Yeah.
me. Let me not put my nose ring back in, so that maybe the 2% that might take me a little less seriously because I look too much like a leftist. So I became this person that I wanted to use myself as a tool. And then I came to the point of questioning, like, what is the cost of being a tool? And when we play the games of appeal, we can turn ourselves into tools. But some people can speak to that group and it come out of full authenticity. And then for me, that might not be my group. And so this is the necessity for all of us to be involved. Some people can speak to that and it doesn't feel like it degrades their humanity or the humanity of anybody else. And it feels like it's out of a good place. And then for me, it's like I want to be able to say the words that I want to say without being so careful. I want to have the fire that comes out of me authentically, not filtered and thinking about this perspective and this perspective and this perspective. And it's exhausting. And you know this, it's exhausting for you too. And one of the conclusions that I came to is I can be as tough and as outspoken and as accountability oriented as I want to be, as long as I'm speaking from love. Like what you said, as long as I'm saying that I want the liberation of the oppressor and the oppressed, that I acknowledge the humanity of everyone involved, and I want to assert the humanity of everyone involved, then then I'm good. Then like all the little word choices, maybe they don't matter anymore. But also recognizing, for me, I have a lot of privilege here. People approach me with a hermeneutic of generosity. They interpret my words as being with more graciousness than they interpret words that come from Palestinians. And I would think that blonde girl talking about Palestine, primarily talking about Palestine, would be accused of a lot more anti-Semitism than Palestinians. I probably should be accused of a lot more like anti-Semitism than Palestinians, because it's like, what are you doing here? Why are you care? And obviously, I've given enough context in my life and why I care about this and all this stuff. But there are a lot of people who've co-opted the cause, who've tried to jump on the bandwagon just because they hate Jewish people. But people still don't look at me with the same degree of skepticism as they look at you or at other Palestinians. That's absurd.
It is absurd. It is so the reality though. It's so the reality. I mean, you brought up the point of like you always need to, in a lot of these things, you need to have an Israeli there, or you need to have a Jewish person there, or you need to have a white blonde person there. It does feel that way, and I think that like it has bothered me in some cases to see, like in some of my, in community work and that there is sort of this like, oh, if we talk about Palestine, or if we talk about Arabs or Muslims, even not even Palestine, if we talk about Arabs or Muslims, we need to make sure that we talk about anti-Semitism and Judaism, and to me, I'm like, it's just sort of like pitting us against each other. Like, like there always has to be like the other side. I mean, why can't we just be a people that have dignity and get to speak about ourselves and not always need someone to validate us or ensure that you don't feel like we might be called anti-Semitic because we didn't include them. There's a lot of that to me is it's sort of at the root of the problem, where it's the root of the problem of politics of appeal is like we have to show that that they're that we've given both people a right to say something, which it's not, and it sort of depends on the scenario. But I mean, we were talking a little bit about the films, and like a lot of the film, like the film that won Oscar, is it No Other Land? That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been some really interesting conversation about it. I am so happy that it won an Oscar. I am thrilled to see people learn. That's one of my biggest hopes is just people learn about what's happening, especially those who've been apathetic and have not been involved. I think it's going to be very hard to convince anyone who is a super ethno-nationalist pro-Israel person to change their mind. I feel like when we talk about like who are our audience, I don't think I can sway those people. I don't
No.
think they want to be swayed. I don't think they want to learn. I think they want to see me as the enemy, and that's just what it's going to be. But for those that do want to learn or are now thinking I'd like to learn, things like this movie will open their eyes and teach them.
Yeah.
And yes, it did have an Israeli co-director, and he did speak in, I thought, very strong ways against what the Israeli government and military is doing. Now, do I feel that that is one of the reasons why it got an award, why it was allowed to get an award? Had it just been done by a Palestinian, would it have gotten an award? I don't think it would have. I think that is still part of the requirements of the world that we live in right now. And I don't like that. And I'm seeing people talk about that in progressive spaces and social media, saying like, why does there have to be? I think you can have both of those. You can have both of those feelings. It is good that people are going to get educated. It is good that the film won, and yeah, and hopefully that opens people's eyes, and then they say, well, why doesn't it have a distributor?
One of the things with that film that I've been thinking about as I've seen a lot of the takes online and have agreed with a lot of them, even the ones that seem contradictory, is that yeah, there's that kind of one leg in reality, one leg in the dream
Yes,
here.
it's a great way of putting it.
That's should a film that is only directed by Palestinians be able to make it to the Oscars and win an Oscar? There's so much good storytelling out there from Palestinians. Absolutely. Does this help to open doors and to expose Palestinian narratives and the injustices that are happening in the West Bank? Also true.
So true.
And can we use this as a tool? And whenever we're in spaces where we have to talk to moderates or we're doing co-resistance, then there's so much complexity there. So I don't want to go through Yuval's speech and do like line by line about did I agree with this or did I not agree with this. I know that there was a lot of people who felt like talking about October 7th and talking about the hostages and like it was detracting from the very real like the not that is not real, but the detracting from the story of the film and having to appeal to everybody.
Yeah, there's politics of appeal. He had some politics of appeal there. Yeah.
Completely. And he's talking to a room full of it's like a lot of these people in this room are supporters of Israel. And so, but you could say this line, I wouldn't say that line. This one, I think you could keep that one in here. Da 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 da. When you are talking to moderates, it's so hard. When you're talking to friends, when you're talking to your comrades, like you don't have to like you can just be honest. You can be forth like and you don't have to live in that tension. Politics of appeal is always going to be something that those of us who speak to moderates will have to wrestle with. And even having an Israeli on stage, that's politics of appeal to maybe, like according to some people would call it co-resistance. So all of these things, when you live in the trying to change minds of people who fundamentally, and this is really painful, haven't come to terms with the fact that there's a genocide happening yet, there's every single word you're going to have to like process. Every single action is going to need to be discussed by the community of how to do this in the best way. I just don't think that there's any way around that. And I hope that we can approach these things graciously. I also like understand the criticism of there was like a Kickstarter that followed the film. One of the co-organizers at the Kickstarter is this Israeli businessman who also in another Kickstarter was selling like tiles from Haifa. Like there's other stuff going on here that also compounded this criticism of feeling like this is normalization, which normalization is a conversation probably for an entire other episode. And I would love to not have it just be the two of us because I would love to get other perspectives on it. But that there's these conversations, the people who feel pissed off about what he said or that he was even on that stage who are really pro-Palestine, all of these perspectives needs to happen because we have to learn how to live in this tension, and we have to learn how to do that well. We have to learn how to do that in a way that's dignifying, because there is no full model for there's no blueprint for how to do this in my mind.
No, I think you said it's super well. I didn't know the additional things that were happening with like tiles from Haifa and wow. You know, I I have to limit what I read, and we both do. I know that we both are trying to like also be careful about how much we're reading in terms of social media. But yeah, I don't see a way out right now of politics of appeal. I don't think it's I wish, and I love the way that you put that, the one foot in reality and one foot in, was it in dream?
In the dream, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my dream is that we wouldn't have to do politics of appeal. My dream would be that people would just see it and they wouldn't be afraid to just see the truth of injustice and see that all people should be free and work toward that. That's my dream. I love that dream. Um, but I want us to get there. And like it's not just going to happen with the way that people have been indoctrinated, have been taught. There's got to be a lot of unlearning to get people to get there. I and so I do think, and it's so hard for me because I read, some of the people who are on the very, very speaking their full truth about not wanting to do politics of appeal and calling it out, like Muhammad El-Kurd. And there's a, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, that sounds really appealing. That feels so good to just be completely free of having to constantly make sure everything works for an audience to get there. But that's not going to be my role. I think that I have to know that I want more people to join this collective liberation movement. And I know that people need to be brought in. And the only way to bring them in is to at least step a little bit in their direction so that they can they can understand what we're saying versus feeling like, oh, that is very like um that is too strong and I'm too scared. Again, I think we're dealing with people are people and they have fears and they are scared to take moves, especially in this very volatile cancel culture, things changing constantly world. So it's much easier to just sit back and just let things happen. But if you could give them strength and feeling and words that invite them in without like, again, this is without like going against your own morals and ethics. That I don't think we have to do. But we do have to do this sort of dance to invite them into the dance.
Yep. And inviting into, there's that like nonviolent communication thing, connection before correction. And as agonizing as that can be sometimes, and it's not required of everyone. And this is the thing that I want to say, because sometimes when we get into these conversations, people say, I don't have emotional capacity for that. I don't want to be talking to those people. Why would I want to talk to people who
Not
don't
everyone should have to.
like fully see me as human? And that's the piece of, yeah, not everyone should have to. And yeah, we all have a different role in this movement. Some of us are, it's all about strategizing and talking about dismantling these systems and thinking about the ways that we're going to do that and getting out there in the streets. And then some of us, it is talking to those people who we want to recruit into this and help them understand it. And there's a connection required for that education, because and connection is required for educating someone out of prejudice as well. Like, it's easy to believe lies about someone you don't know. So we have to bring, like, if there's a few of us, if there's some of us who feel like we can do this and live in that tension, and also understand when we say something that doesn't feel quite right in our bodies, and like have the grace from our community for changing some of our language or our strategies as we go. I think that it is critical that some of us are talking to the moderates here. And yeah, I think we can do that without without sacrificing our morals and ethics. And I think we can do that in a way that uses words that bring people in that are still authentic to us. They might just interpret them differently, like learning to say peace and then back that up with what's the real definition of peace. It's not just order and comfort for the people who are privileged, but peace is an approachable word. So how can we do this? I think it will be an ongoing conversation. Living in the tension will be an ongoing process of how to be even true and honest with ourselves without masking, because I know that's something that you and I both have talked about and have struggled with, while also being not gentle, but inviting.
Yeah, and I think the only way we can do that work, we come back to this all the time, is by being in community with each other, by having these conversations with each other. I would personally find it impossible to keep being on this tightrope, which is what it feels like, if I did not feel like I have a community of people that will catch me and that are there for me, and they understand where I'm coming from, and they understand that this is an unfair system where we do have to we do have to do these things of politics of appeal to help the movement grow.
I don't have anything to add from what you just said. That was a good summary of everything we just talked about.
Oh my goodness. It's a lot.
This is, yeah. It's going to be an ongoing conversation. This, very similar to cancel culture, this conversation doesn't
No, it's an
stop here.
ongoing conversation, and there's ongoing discomfort. It's uncomfortable. It's interesting for me, like, and I spoke about that in that one interview with Bahia, um, where I spoke about the fact that, like, I'm taking off these layers of masks of myself. And it does feel that way. And so I feel better and better and better, and I'm more true to my beliefs. But there's, like, still that one layer, right? And it's that layer to make sure that I can stay relevant in a way that I can help, which is a little bit of like what Naomi Klein is talking about also in her book about doppelganger. Like, it would be so amazing if we just didn't have to do that. And I think it's because we live in a culture where everything's so fast and people don't give people the time. Like, if you sat with either of us and you listen to how we feel about the world and how we care about people and how we believe about nonviolence, if you did that, you would know that we do not want harm to any innocent people, that we hold no bad feelings in our heart toward Jewish people. Like, you would know that. But because we live in a culture where, oh, it's like one little snapshot of what this person said, and now there's like a whole slew of comments about how horrific that person is, and you've been judged by that. Again, we're going to cancel culture. But that, I think, is part of why we have to keep that one mask on, is because if we don't, we become a canceled person who can no longer participate and help the movement.
And that's, I think, one of the things that I am wrestling with is when you choose your audience, you choose who you're speaking to, but you also choose who's allowed to criticize you. And as I've processed through the past 3 weeks of, am I who I want to be on social media? Am I really speaking to who I want to speak to? And then in that, am I really speaking to the people that I want to hear from?
Yeah.
And I may take all the masks off. I don't know if I'll keep that one layer on. I have kept it on, and I understand the practicality of keeping it on. I think I've come to a point where continuing to play some of these politics of appeal stuff, and beyond that, just speaking to the moderates who don't quite get it, I've lost a lot of respect for those people. So can I continue to speak to people that I don't respect and don't really want to hear from? And I think that'll be probably a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I might be ready to take the full mask off, which we'll find out what that looks
I
like.
feel amazing. It's like the Nina Simone. song we were talking
Yeah.
about. What did she say? I wish I could say all the things that I should say. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole round world to hear.
I've always loved that
Such a
song.
beautiful song. I've been playing it all the time.
I love how they played that at the end of Mo as well. I was like, oh, this is one of my favorites.
Everyone should just listen to it. It's actually, there's one line that she says that really, every time I hear it, I like kind of, my heart, my heart just sort of like patters. I wish you could know what it means to be me, then you'd see and agree that every man should be free.
Mm.
That's like the essence of collective liberation in a song. In a song.
It is.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.